5 catastrophic decisions, millions of lives altered forever. From beaches of Dunkirk to frozen Russian steppes, from burning harbors to bridges that went too far, these are the blunders that changed World War II and shaped our world today. May 1940. Nazi Germany's blitzkrieg has smashed through France with unprecedented speed and ferocity. The British Expeditionary Force and remnants of the French army are trapped against the English Channel at the small port town of Dunkirk. Over 300,000 Allied soldiers huddle on the beaches, surrounded on all sides by German forces. Their tanks are abandoned, their supplies exhausted, and their defeat appears inevitable. German panzer divisions are racing toward the port, just 10 miles away, ready to deliver the killing blow. Victory is within Hitler's grasp. The complete destruction of Britain's army would force Churchill to negotiate peace, leaving Germany master of Europe. But on May 24th, Hitler makes a decision that will haunt him for the rest of the war. He orders his tank commanders to halt their advance. The reasons for this catastrophic order remain debated by historians. Some believe Hitler feared the marshy Flanders terrain would bog down his precious armored divisions. Others argued that Luftwaffe chief Hermann Göring convinced Hitler to let his bombers finish the job and claim the glory. Whatever the reason, the Halt Order gave the Allies a precious gift: time. For 3 critical days, German tanks sat idle while Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of Dunkirk, swung into action. The Royal Navy mobilized every available warship, but they knew it wouldn't be enough. Then something extraordinary happened. Hundreds of civilian vessels answered the call. Fishing boats, pleasure yachts, lifeboats, and even paddle steamers crossed the channel under German bombardment. These little ships ferried exhausted soldiers from the beaches to larger vessels waiting offshore. By June 4th, when the evacuation ended, 338,226 British, French, and Belgian troops had escaped. Winston Churchill called it a miracle of deliverance. Hitler's Halt Order had snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. These rescued soldiers would form the core of Britain's army, later returning to liberate Europe on D-Day. The war, rather than ending in 1940, would rage for 5 more years. Adolf Hitler had always intended to destroy the Soviet Union. In December 1940, he issued Führer Directive 21. Operation Barbarossa would begin in May 1941, crushing Stalin's regime before the summer ended. Hitler promised his generals that they would kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. But history had other plans. In spring 1941, Hitler's attention turned to the Balkans. Mussolini's disastrous invasion of Greece forced Germany to intervene, and Yugoslavia's sudden coup required military action. These campaigns consumed precious weeks. Additionally, unusually heavy spring rains turned Eastern European roads into rivers of mud, delaying the concentration of German forces. The invasion date slipped, first to early June, then to June 22nd. This seemingly minor 38-day delay would have catastrophic consequences. When Operation Barbarossa finally launched on June 22, 1941, it was the largest invasion in human history. Over 3 million German soldiers, 36 tankered tanks, and 27 Ehrenschaft aircraft smashed into Soviet territory along an 1,800-mile front. For months, victory seemed certain. German armies encircled hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops, captured vast territories, and drove deep into Russia. But the last weeks in May proved critical. By October, autumn rains turned roads into impassable swamps, slowing the German advance. Supply lines stretched impossibly thin. Then winter arrived, early and with savage fury. Temperatures plunged to -40°C. German soldiers, equipped only with summer uniforms, froze in their positions. Weapons seized up in the cold, tanks wouldn't start, frostbite disabled entire units. Meanwhile, Soviet forces adapted. Fresh Siberian divisions, equipped with winter clothing and specialized for cold weather combat, launched fierce counterattacks around Moscow in December 1941. The Blitzkrieg ground to a halt. Hitler's 6-week campaign transformed into a 4-year war of annihilation that would consume 27 million Soviet lives and ultimately destroy the Third Reich. Had Barbarossa begun in May, German armies might have captured Moscow before winter, changing the course of history. December 7, 1941, 7:48 a.m., Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Japanese aircraft screamed out of the morning sky in one of the most devastating surprise attacks in military history. Within 2 hours, they had sunk or damaged 8 battleships, destroyed 188 aircraft, and killed 2,403 Americans. Admiral Yamamoto's plan had achieved tactical brilliance, but contained a fatal strategic flaw that would cost Japan the war. As smoke billowed from burning battleships and the harbor churned with oil and debris, Japanese pilots reported complete success. But high above Pearl Harbor, they circled past something they didn't attack: the fuel storage facilities. Just northeast of the harbor stood massive above-ground oil tanks containing 4.5 million barrels of fuel oil, virtually the entire fuel reserve for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. These cylindrical tanks, each holding tens of thousands of barrels, were clearly visible and utterly undefended. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commander of the Japanese Carrier Strike Force, had a critical decision to make. His pilots urged a third wave attack to destroy the repair facilities, submarine base, and those enormous fuel tanks. But Nagumo, concerned about American carriers still at sea and fearful of risking his carriers, ordered the fleet to withdraw. It was a decision that would haunt Japan for the rest of the war. The consequences were immediate and devastating for Japan. Had those oil tanks been destroyed, the Pacific Fleet would have been crippled for 6 to 12 months, possibly longer. Every ship required fuel to operate. Without it, Admiral Nimitz would have been forced to retreat to the west coast, abandoning the entire Central Pacific. Repair operations would have been impossible. The planned counteroffensives of 1942 and 1943 would never have happened. Instead, with fuel supplies intact, Pearl Harbor recovered with remarkable speed. The repair facilities, also untouched, worked around the clock. Within months, damaged ships were returned to service. The carriers that had been at sea during the attack, fully fueled from those preserved tanks, launched the Doolittle raid on Tokyo and won the decisive Battle of Midway just 6 months later. Japanese naval strategists would later call the failure to destroy Pearl Harbor's fuel supplies their greatest tactical error of the entire war. December 11, 1941, 4 days after Pearl Harbor, Adolf Hitler stood before the Reichstag in Berlin and made perhaps the single most catastrophic decision of World War II. He declared war on the United States of America. With this one pronouncement, Hitler transformed a potentially manageable 2-front war into an impossible 3-front nightmare that would destroy the Third Reich. The declaration shocked many of Hitler's own military advisors. Germany had no treaty obligation to support Japan's war against America. The Tripartite Pact only required mutual defense if a member was attacked, and Japan had been the aggressor at Pearl Harbor. Hitler could have remained neutral, leaving America focused entirely on the Pacific. Instead, he chose confrontation with the world's largest economy and industrial power. Why did Hitler make this suicidal decision? Several factors converged. Hitler believed America was already an undeclared enemy, providing weapons and supplies to Britain through Lend-Lease. He was furious about increasingly hostile U.S. Navy actions in the Atlantic, including attacks on German submarines. He convinced himself that America, focused on Japan, couldn't fight effectively in Europe. Most critically, Hitler's ideology viewed America as weak, corrupt, and racially inferior, incapable of matching German military prowess. He could not have been more wrong. America's declaration of war unleashed an industrial avalanche that buried the Axis powers. By 1944, American factories were producing more weapons than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. The numbers are staggering: 300,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, 3,000 naval vessels, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition. American troops flooded into North Africa, then Italy, then France. Strategic bombing flattened German cities and factories. Most importantly, American resources sustained Britain and the Soviet Union when they were on the brink of collapse. By bringing America fully into the European war, Hitler guaranteed Germany's defeat. General Alfred Jodl later testified at Nuremberg that the declaration of war on America was the moment we lost World War II. What began as Hitler's bid for European domination ended with Soviet troops raising their flag over the ruins of Berlin, enabled by American weapons, American trucks, and American food. September 1944. Allied armies had liberated France and were racing toward Germany. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery proposed a daring plan to end the war by Christmas: Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne operation in history. The concept was brilliant, but breathtakingly ambitious. Parachute and glider forces would capture a series of bridges across the Netherlands, creating a corridor for armored columns to punch through German defenses, cross the Rhine River, and invade Germany's industrial heartland. On September 17, 1944, the operation began with spectacular grandeur. Over 35,000 paratroopers from the American 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions and the British 1st Airborne Division dropped from the sky over Holland. Thousands of gliders carried artillery, vehicles, and equipment. On the ground, British 30 Corps began their armored thrust up a single highway toward the final objective, the bridge at Arnhem. Success required capturing all bridges intact and maintaining the narrow corridor against German counterattacks. Almost immediately the plan unraveled. Allied intelligence had catastrophically failed. They missed the presence of 2 SS Panzer divisions refitting near Arnhem. These battle-hardened units immediately counterattacked the lightly armed paratroopers. The single road to Arnhem became a killing zone as German forces attacked the long exposed British column from both sides. The 1st Airborne Division, expecting relief within 48 hours, instead found themselves surrounded and fighting for survival. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, his 2nd Battalion, reached the northern end of Arnhem Bridge and held it heroically for 4 days against overwhelming odds. But without reinforcement, their position became hopeless. German tanks and artillery systematically destroyed the British positions. Radio equipment failures prevented coordination. Bad weather grounded supply drops. The Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade dropped directly into German guns. After 9 days of brutal combat, the survivors were evacuated across the Rhine. Of the 10,000 British airborne troops who landed at Arnhem, only 2,000 escaped. Total Allied casualties exceeded 17,000, killed, wounded, or captured. The bridge and the quick end to the war remained in German hands. The war would continue for 8 more brutal months. Operation Market Garden became a symbol of ambition exceeding capability, immortalized in Cornelius Ryan's book, A Bridge Too Far. It was a gamble that failed, and thousands paid the price. Montgomery later admitted the operation had been 90% successful. But in war, 90% means failure when brave men's lives hang in the balance. 5 decisions, 5 turning points. Dunkirk's miracle gave Britain hope. Barbarossa's delay froze Hitler's ambitions. Pearl Harbor's intact tanks fueled American vengeance. Hitler's declaration sealed Germany's doom. And Arnhem's Bridge remained one step too far. In war, victory and defeat often balance on a single choice.